All right, hello. Let's get started on our first lesson of the reproductive system unit. This is the anatomy of the reproductive system. So there are two different structures. There is a reproductive anatomy for a person who was assigned female at birth and a person who is assigned male at birth. There's also intersex people, so kind of like a mix of two. So it's a very broad range, but these are the more common ones that are shown. So let's first look at the female assigned at birth. So they have a vulva. A vulva is the outer part of the genitals. They're outside of the body. Okay, that's usually called the vagina, but that is not correct. That is the vulva, the outer part. Then there is the uterus. That is the pear-shaped muscular organ right here. So before the cervix, it is the uterus, okay? It's also known as the womb. Once there is a egg implanted and there is a fetus growing, that's what it's called. It's a womb after that. Then there are ovaries. So there's two ovaries. It's kind of like a storage unit for your eggs. It also produces hormones, estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. So those three things are produced in the ovaries. And they do that to control things like periods and pregnancies. Okay. Then there's the fallopian tubes that goes from the ovaries to the uterus. So there's two of them. And they carry the eggs from the ovaries, again, to the uterus, okay? This is also where sperm travels to fertilize the egg. So it goes all the way from the vaginal opening to the fallopian tubes over here. Okay, so fallopian tubes, that's where it is fertilized, okay? Then there is the cervix, okay? So that's in between the uterus and the vagina. It's dividing the vagina from the uterus. That lets the menstrual blood out and sperm in. It also lets babies out. This is called labor. The cervix dilates or opens during childbirth, and then the child comes out. It separates it from the vagina for the rest of the body so things can't get lost inside, and it keeps things out. And then lastly is the vagina. That's below the cervix, and that's just an opening where babies and blood leave the body. Okay, so that's the only prime function of the vagina. It's also called the birth canal when a baby is going through it. Okay. So again, there's the uterus. It kind of looks like a wine-shaped structure, like right here. But it's this whole entire thing is the muscular part too. It is hollow on the inside. It's also called the womb. The ovaries, that's where the eggs are stored. The fallopian tubes, that's where sperm is fertilizing the egg. So the egg leaves the ovaries, and then the sperm meets the egg somewhere in between here. And then the egg moves on to the uterus. We'll talk about that more. And then in between the uterus and the vagina is the cervix, keeps things out. So things don't get lost up there. And then finally the vagina is just also known as the birth canal, lets things get out when they need to get out. Okay, so next is the reproductive anatomy for someone who was assigned male at birth. So there is the penis. That's the external sex anatomy along with the scrotum. It's sexual function, so it penetrates, but it also acts as a channel for urine to leave the body. So that's where your pee comes from. Then next is the scrotum, also known as ball sack. That is the skin that hangs below your penis, and it holds the testicles and keeps them at the right temperature. So it actually pulls and relaxes depending if it's too cold. So if it's too cold, it will pull up towards the body to keep it warm, and then when it's too hot, it will relax. Okay, and then there are testes. There's two of them. They are inside the scrotum, and they produce sperm, and they also hold or produce hormones like testosterone and estrogen. Okay, so both male and female assigned at birth produce testosterone and estrogen. Okay. Then lastly, there's the prostate gland right here. That produces a fluid that helps sperm move. Well, that's not last that we're going to talk about, but that's the last on the slide. Next is the vas deferens. That's the tube that flows from the epididymis, which is like a sperm storage unit. So it's this long purple tube right there. There's two of them, and it flows again from the epididymis to the urethra. Okay, so all the way from here to here. Then there's the seminal vesicle. That stores and produces the majority of the fluid that makes up semen. And it also protects the sperm. So that fluid protects sperm by neutralizing acids. So P is acidic. But also sperm comes through the urethra of people who have penises. So it needs to be protected from that acid P. And also a vagina is more acidic, so it needs to protect itself as it's going to find another egg. And then there is the ejaculatory duct that delivers sperm to the urethra. So it's that duct right here. Okay. It's like right next to the vas deferens. And it again adds fluid to form. It adds fluid from the prostate and allows sperm to function the way it needs to function. And then lastly is the urethra. That's the tube that carries urine and precum and semen through the urethral opening and outside of the body. Okay, so both people who have uteruses and people who have penises have a urethra. The only difference is that the people who have penises also secrete semen outside of the urethra. Okay. So now let's talk about sexual development. So how does the body figure out what we should have in terms of our sexual reproduction? Should we have a uterus? Should we have testicles? So what happens is for the first 6 weeks, everyone is pretty much the same. There's undifferentiated gonads, so that means just undifferentiated reproductive system. And then after 6 weeks, that major change occurs. So around the 7th week, and then testes or ovaries develop. So it either produces more estrogen or more testosterone to begin to produce its specified reproductive system. Okay, so it mostly depends on, well, it does depend on if there's 2 X chromosomes or an X and a Y chromosome. And then after the 7th week mark, it looks and says, oh, I have 2 X's. Let me make more estrogen. And then it produces the specified reproductive system. Okay, next is puberty. Puberty is just a process of physical changes where a child's body starts to mature into an adult body that is capable of sexual reproduction. Okay, so it's able to reproduce. It starts by the initiation of this hormone that's released called gonadotropin releasing hormone. Okay, and that occurs around 8 through 12. It depends on everyone, but it's usually around 8 to 12 years old. Okay. Oh. Sorry, that was my grandma. So as puberty progresses, testes release testosterone and sperm production occurs. Okay. And then ovaries start releasing estrogen and progesterone, and these eggs begin to release. So that is all because of this hormone, gonadotropin releasing hormone. Okay. Then there is the menstrual cycle. The menstrual cycle lasts 28 days and is calculated from the first day of your period to the day before your period starts. So there are 4 phases. There's menstruation, that's your period. That's the elimination of a thickened lining of the uterus. So right here, if there was no egg or the egg was not fertilized, the lining begins to shed. Next is the follicular phase. The hormone is, a certain hormone is released to stimulate the ovary to produce follicles, which are just tiny cysts, to house an immature egg. And then that follicle lets that egg mature, and the growth of the follicle is what causes the uterus to thicken. So the follicle is releasing a certain hormone to make the uterine lining thick, okay? Because it's like, oh, this egg is starting to want to mature. Let me get ready for a baby. Next is ovulation. That's the release of a mature egg. So the egg is fully developed. It occurs around 1 to 2 weeks before menstruation. So it releases from the ovaries and goes down to the fallopian tubes. And then lastly, it is the luteal phase. So what happens is an egg bursts from the follicle during ovulation, and then the ruptured follicle, so it's still in the ovary, the ruptured follicle stays on the ovary and develops into a corpus luteum, which actually releases hormones to maintain that thickened lining, just in case there's a fertilized egg. If there's no fertilized egg, the corpus luteum dies off, and then the lining falls away, going back to menstruation. Okay, so that's the whole cycle. So that's all I had for today. Let me call my grandma back. I hope you learned something new, and I will see you next time.